Adventures. Biff, Chip, Kipper, and their friends are on a mission. As time runners, they have to help the last time guardian, Mortlock, in his battle to defeat the evil Vyrons. The Vyrons aim to cause chaos by going back in time and changing history. And it's the Time Runner's job to stop them. In this story, Nadim and Nina go back to London in 1666, the time of the Great Fire of London. Chapter 1. No one was in the mood for a madman. It was just too hot.
Plague! Fire! Famine!
The madman shouted as he strode back and forth through the crowds of people on the bridge.
'Tis 1666, and London is doomed!
The madman grabbed at passers-by. He had to tell someone. But they always pushed him away. If only someone would listen. But no one would. On the side of the bridge, a dark man stood still, staring out at the river.
Maybe he will listen,
thought the madman. He weaved his way through the crowds crying,
The end of the world is now!
Even when the madman stopped next to him, the dark man didn't move. He continued to stare out from the bridge. What was he looking at? The madman squinted in the bright sunshine. Some way down the river were two tall ships. Their proud masts shimmered in the hazy heat. They were Royal Navy warships. The dark man seemed to be studying them closely. On the decks of both ships, sailors were busy preparing to go to sea. The madman tugged at the man's sleeve.
You see, last year it was the plague. This year we are at war! The end of the world is coming, I tell you!
Slowly, the dark man turned his head and stared into the madman's eyes. The madman felt as if his heart had stopped. The dark man smiled.
Yes, the end of the world is coming,
he whispered. The madman couldn't believe what he had seen in the other man's eyes, a darkness so terrifying that it sent the madman stumbling away. A Vyron darkness. The Vyron hadn't wanted to reveal himself to anyone. He wasn't ready for that yet. But then, what did it matter? No one would believe a madman. The Vyron turned back and studied the two ships. He needed to smuggle something on board. That was his deadly task. But how, when the ships were so heavily guarded? Chapter 2. The madman stumbled through the crowds. He crashed heavily against a handcart loaded with sacks of flour. It had just come from the mill at the end of the bridge. The man pushing the cart shouted at him.
Kindly stand aside! I am in a hurry! I've seen the darkness!
cried the madman. The man driving the cart glanced quickly at the two warships downstream.
I don't have time for this,
he muttered.
I know you!
cried the madman.
You are that Mr. Royal Bread and Biscuit Man! Thomas Fariner, the King's baker, supplier of bread and biscuit to His Majesty's Navy, if you please,
snapped Thomas.
Though I might not be for much longer if you don't get out of my way. I have an order of biscuit that has to be finished and on board ship by tomorrow.
As Thomas pushed on through the crowd, the Viren turned and followed. He had heard Thomas talking to the madman, and now he had an idea. Chapter 3. It was late by the time Thomas had finished baking. As he packed the last of the Navy's order for ship's biscuit, his concentration was broken by a noise outside. It was the night watchman walking up Pudding Lane. Thomas listened to the watchman's familiar call.
"'Tis after 1. Take care of your lock, your light, and your fire, and then you are done."
Wearily, Thomas raked out the glowing embers in his oven, put out the candles, and went to bed. Time passed. All was quiet in the narrow lanes and alleys. Not even the occasional chime of church bells disturbed the sleeping city. Then, out of the darkness, 2 figures crept into Pudding Lane.
Where are we?
Nina muttered quietly.
Wherever are we?
They paused as if waiting for an answer. Then Nina spoke again.
Oh, great. I've lost contact. I can't get hold of Tyler.
Most of the buildings in the lane had signs hanging from them.
If they're shops,
Said Nina.
maybe they'll give us a clue.
But Nadim wasn't listening. He started to run. He had seen something. Halfway up the lane, one of the shop windows had started to glow with a flickering orange light. As the light grew, Nina could make out the shop sign. It was a loaf of bread, a baker's sign.
"Nina, quick, fire!"
Nadim was already pushing at the bakery door by the time Nina caught up with him. By chance, the door was unlocked. Nadim held his breath and pushed his way into the room. The top half of the room was filled with choking smoke. He dropped to the floor and crawled. His skin felt tight from the intense heat.
"I don't think there's anyone in here."
He shouted.
Then get out!
Screamed Nina.
Now!
"No!
Shouted Nadim.
I just can't make out the fire. It hasn't spread far. I reckon I could put it out."
Without waiting for an answer, Nadim looked around for something to use. To one side was a stack of crates with a heavy canvas cloth thrown over them. Written on the crates were the words H&M, Royal Navy Ship's Biscuit. With all his strength, Nadim hauled the canvas across the room and swung it up over the fire. The cloth smothered the flames in an instant. With the fire out, he staggered out into the lane, coughing.
You are an idiot!
Snapped Nina. You could have been... Suddenly, the link in her pocket started to whir. It was Tyler. Part of a download had got through.
"Download from Tyler. I repeat, danger. September 2nd, 1666, the night the Great Fire of London started. Keep clear of area known as the City. You must not change history by getting involved with the fire."
Nadim gasped.
"You don't think we..."
Nina looked up from the link.
I do.
She nodded.
I think we may have just put out the Great Fire of London before it even got started.
Nadim started to panic.
What do we do now? I mean, we've changed history, which means everything changes from this point onwards. What do we do?
Moments later, another broken message arrived from Tyler.
Download from Tyler. Going on. The time web has gone crazy. It's hard to describe. Everything is blurred. It's as if the time web is trying to change its shape. You must...
Oh, we've got no choice,
said Nina.
We are going to have to restart the fire.
But we can't do that,
gulped Nadim.
People could get hurt. Or worse.
But who knows what terrible things might happen if history is changed forever,
said Nina.
We have to put history back on course.
Nina turned and went into the bakery.
We don't need Virons,
muttered Nadim.
We're doing a pretty good job messing up history on our own.
Chapter 4.
Something isn't right,
said Nina. She was standing in the doorway of the bakery.
You can say that again,
mumbled Nadim.
No, seriously,
whispered Nina.
Can't you feel it?
Feel what?
asked Nadim.
There's just been a fire, right?
said Nina.
And outside, it's a warm night.
She paused.
So, why is it freezing in here?
Virons!
gasped Nadim.
Maybe they started the Great Fire of London.
So, what do we do now?
asked Nina.
Should we restart the fire or not?
No, that won't be necessary,
came a voice from the shadows.
You've just made my task that much easier. I would only have had to put it out myself.
A candle was lit. At the far end of the bakery stood a Viren. Instantly, Nina and Nadim went for their zap traps.
Fools!
Sneered the Viren.
You can't use those Time Runner toys in here. Don't you know that? I'm too close. You'd be hit by the zap as well.
He stared into their eyes.
So Mordlock is pinning his hopes on you, is he? You? Pathetic.
Nadim and Nina's legs were locked solid. They felt dizzy with fear. How did this Viren know so much?
You have been lucky so far,
continued the Viren, as he fixed them with his terrible gaze.
My congratulations, but you have interfered with our work too much.
He lit another candle.
I think you'll find things are not going to be so easy from now on.
The Viren's eyes held both of them. Not only could Nina not move, she was even finding it hard to think. She felt as if the Viren was looking right inside her head. It was as if he was undoing her memory. Nina decided she had to take control of her mind before the Viren did. She had to think of something, and quickly. All she could think of was a stupid old nursery rhyme.
London's burning, fetch the engine, fire, fire.
She chanted over and over in her head. The Viren cocked his head to one side and looked curiously at her. It was as if he could hear her thoughts. He began to laugh.
No, I'm not here to burn London down. My task is much more interesting than that.
He pulled forward an enormous sack.
This,
he said,
is why I'm here.
Nina thought she might be seeing things. The sack was moving on its own. Something inside it writhed and wriggled. Was her mind playing tricks on her? The Viren opened the sack.
This is the answer.
He hissed. pulling out a fistful of squirming legs, tails, black fur, teeth, and claws.
Rats!
He laughed.
Plague rats!
Chapter 5. Nina felt exhausted by the Vyron's draining stare, and she was fighting to stay focused. She glanced at Nadim. He seemed to be in a dream. The Vyron held a couple of rats in front of Nina.
You may be wondering why I'm here in this bakery.
He sneered.
After all, I could release the rats anywhere in the city, and the disease would spread.
Then, why?
Nina managed to mutter.
Perhaps I needed to put out the fire first.
Smiled the Vyron.
Certainly, the Great Fire would have destroyed all my little plague carriers. But then, you've very kindly put it out for me.
Why, you here?
Stuttered Nina. The Vyron wrenched open a crate of ship's biscuit.
Spreading plague in a city just seemed too easy, almost boring. No, my plan is much more interesting.
He dropped some rats into the crate.
Imagine every ship in the Royal Navy out at sea.
He closed the crate and opened another.
Hungry sailors call for their ship's biscuit.
He laughed, throwing rats into the next crate.
The crate is opened, and the rats escape. Then they begin their terrible work. Plague on board. His Majesty's Navy destroyed, without an enemy warship in sight.
The Vyron worked quickly, putting rats in each and every one of the crates of ship's biscuit. When the work was done, he paused, picking up the sack.
It seems I have some left over.
He sniggered.
I may as well let them go.
He held open the sack.
Go, go, my pretty ones.
Nina held her breath. Every fiber in her body was telling her to run, yet she couldn't move. From the sack, a great tide of rats surged into the room.
There's no way the Time Runners will be able to stop this one.
The Vyron cackled. He stared at Nina.
I will not destroy your mind this time. Instead, I want you to go and tell Mortlock. Tell him it is the Vyron's turn now.
At that, he left. For a few minutes, neither Nina nor Nadim could move. Rats scrambled up the walls and over everything. It was only the smell of smoke that brought Nina to her senses. In the scramble, a rat had knocked over the candle. It fell into a basket of dry kindling and wood shavings, which burst into flame. Nina grabbed Nadim.
We have to get out of here, and now!
Nina and Nadim staggered into the lane. Within seconds, the bakery was an angry storm of fire and swirling smoke. The whole building seemed to scream as ancient wooden beams burst into flame. Above the noise, Nina could hear voices. It was the baker Thomas and his family. They were climbing out of a top window to safety. Nadim, still dazed by the Vyron, looked up at them.
Fly away home.
He muttered. He sounded like a little boy.
House is on fire. and all is gone.
Come on, Nadim,
said Nina.
we need to clear our heads.
Chapter 6. The fire in Pudding Lane quickly took hold. The timber houses with their dry, thin walls were no match for the flames. The buildings were so cramped together that the fire spread easily in every direction. As the fire spread through the streets, the people of London began to panic. Some fled, dragging their possessions with them. Others stayed and tried to fight the fire. But leather buckets filled with wastewater could make little difference. Many people were faced with a stark choice: let their homes burn or tear them down using fire hooks. The hope was to break the fire's progress by making gaps in the tightly packed maze of lanes and alleys. Such drastic action might save the city, but it was such a tough decision that most people hesitated until it was too late. Chapter 7. To make matters worse, a strong wind served to fan the flames further. Showers of sparks drifted widely over the city. Very soon, fires were breaking out everywhere. Nadim and Nina were escaping from the fire when Tyler's download arrived.
Download from Tyler. Great news. The time web has settled down. I was trying to sort it without much luck. Then all of a sudden, it just went back to normal.
I bet that was when the fire started. History's back on track,
said Nina.
Great!
Said Nadim.
A city's on fire and we're meant to feel good about it.
Look on the bright side,
said Nina.
At least the Byron's plan is finished.
Unless the plague rats flee the fire like everyone else,
added Nadim. Nina looked at the huge orange glow over the city.
But where would the rats flee to?
She said. Thousands of flakes of ash were falling from the sky like strange snow. A voice in the distance cried,
"It's the end of the world!"
They watched as men rushed past carrying buckets of water from the river.
The river,
said Nadim.
That has to be the safest place right now. Let's go!
The river was in chaos. The fire had destroyed everything in its path, and now it threatened London Bridge. People, animals, rats, all streamed towards the river's edge. Now, the only escape from the flames was to jump into the muddy water itself. Downstream, the Navy's ships hadn't stirred. They were unable to help. The tide was too low. Only one dark figure stood waiting and watching. It was the Byron. From every gully and drain, rats scurried from the advancing fire. Among them stood the Byron. Every now and then, he bent down and scooped one up. It was as if he were choosing the ones he wanted. The ones carrying plague, perhaps? Suddenly, a flash of blue flame filled the air around the Byron. The flame hadn't come from the Great Fire. It had come from Nadim's zap trap, but he'd missed. The Byron grinned. He turned and ran through the fire that now licked around the start of the bridge.
We have to stop him!
Shouted Nadim. Grabbing hold of Nina's hand, he plunged into the smoke and flame after the Byron. Beyond this point, the bridge was still safe but strangely deserted. At the far end was a gatehouse. The Byron ran towards it, but the gates were closed. The Byron was trapped. Thinking fast, the Byron spun round and smashed its way into the nearest building on the bridge, a flour mill. Inside the mill was a mass of machinery, giant cogs, wheels, and shafts. Lit by the glare of 1,000 fires, it cast strange patterns of shadow and light all around. Being of darkness, the Viren slipped easily into shadows. It was hard for Nadim and Nina to adjust their eyes to the gloom. All was still.
I can't see him,
Hissed Nadim. With the background roar of the great fire, they'd never hear him either. In a deadly game of cat and mouse, the Viren moved from one shadow to another around them.
I'm scared,
Said Nina. Whispered Nadim.
Stay absolutely still.
He had had an idea. Nina gripped her zap trap. At Nadim's feet were sacks of flour. Slowly, he bent down and grabbed 2 large handfuls. He threw them as hard as he could in a high arc across the room. A fine dust filled the air and hung like a strange mist all around.
Watch for any movement in the dust.
Nadim whispered. Then to one side, the dust rippled. The air had been disturbed. The Viren had moved.
duck!
Whispered Nina to Nadim as she launched her zap trap. The blue zap reached out towards the Viren. It burst into raw energy. For a fraction of a second, the whole space was lit up as millions of particles of flour dust ignited. The zap trap fell to the floor empty, but the Viren was gone.
We've used both zap traps,
Said Nina.
We'll have to head back to the time vault.
Meanwhile, somewhere down on the river, a small whirlwind of sparks spun over the water. The Viren began to take form again.
Tyler's Mission Report. Location, London, England. Date, 1666. Mission, unsuccessful. Case open. Viren status, 1 zapped, not trapped. Note, Viren still loose. We may have to return. For the people who lived and worked in London's crowded streets, the fire was like the end of the world. So many people homeless, lost. Makes me shudder. It was on those same streets that I lived. London had been rebuilt by then. All the buildings were stone, and everything was designed to prevent fire spreading so disastrously ever again. Weird. The streets I knew, the walls I climbed, the cellars I hid in, were all there because of that fire. Talking of cellars, one cellar I remember had a black band of soot running all the way round the walls. From the Great Fire, I was told. Even today, dig down anywhere in London and you'll find soot. One good thing though, the fire destroyed so many rats. London was finally free of the plague. Sign off, Tyler.
History. Downloaded. The Great Fire of London, 1666. With a firestorm hot enough to melt glass and metal, nothing survived the terrible events of September 1666. The city, its buildings, its treasures, its history, all burned to a crust of black, lifeless earth. Once a fire took hold, it was almost impossible to stop it spreading. The buildings, crammed together along narrow lanes, were all made of wood, much of it painted with tar. Even the plaster, mixed with horsehair, spread the fire onwards. The lanes themselves became deadly wind tunnels, drawing whirlwinds of superheated air, which fanned the flames deep into the city. London had had great fires before, but this fire, at the end of a long hot summer, was the most ferocious of them all. Out of control for 4 days and destroying over 13,500 buildings, it truly was the Great Fire of London. Sparks were carried across the city on the high winds, and fires seemed to break out everywhere. Many people thought that London was under attack from enemy spies. The bakery in Pudding Lane, where the fire started in reality, was not the first suspect. For more information, see the Time Chronicles website, www.oxfordprimary.co.uk/Time Chronicles.
A voice from history. Last summer, it was plague rather than fire that raged through our streets, burning people up in a feverish black death. If it were a fire, we'd have torn down any house in its path to try to stop it spreading further. To stop the plague, we tried something similar. Desperate measures. At the first sign of illness, poor wretches were locked in their homes with the rest of their family. The door was only unlocked again to pull out the bodies using a long hook. Sounds hard? We had to stop the plague spreading somehow. Besides, once the plague got hold, no doctor could help anyway. Oh, they tried with their remedies they called waters, but no amount of water could extinguish the flames that burnt up a victim's insides. We were terrified. Isn't it ironic? We even tried setting London alight. By September 1665, fires smoldered everywhere, day and night. The choking smoke, we hoped, would drive this pestilence from our doors. It didn't.